Who does this?
It's tragic. I mean, this gentleman just recently lost his mother, and to add that to it, I mean, my heart goes out to him. I just hope he gets some answers.
Many of us grew up with our parents telling us not to touch things in the house. It's a pretty common occurrence. So when Adam Smith's mother told him not to touch the box in the freezer, he really didn't think anything of it throughout his life. But what exactly is in the box? A secret that changes everything for Adam.
I was always told it was like a wedding cake top.
Something you have no control over, but that drastically affects your life, is who your mother is and how she treats you. It lays the foundation for so many things in your life. Some say a mother's love is the purest love known to humankind.
Everything your mother do for you is for your survival.
Clearly they don't know any theologians or bad mothers. Adam Smith, 37, is quick to defend his mother, saying she was the kind of mother that always kept food on the table and a roof over her children's heads. But an astute observer will note that children rarely say that about parents that were healthy or would be labeled a good parent by others. So it should come as no surprise that his mother, Barbara Smith, also had her flaws and her secrets.
My mom has always been so secretive about things throughout life.
Before the birth of Adam in 1981 and Susan in the late 1970s, their mother Barbara had had several jobs, including working as a postal carrier. But from what she told them, she was forced to give up working because there was no one to take care of Adam and his sister. But between Susan and Adam, Barbara had also had twins. One was stillborn, and the other, a girl, she gave up for adoption despite the frustration this caused some of her family members. No one in the family was able to keep tabs on the girl, so she wasn't involved in Adam or Susan's childhood at all. In fact, no one in the family even knew her name. Adam and his older sister Susan Smith grew up in the St. Louis area, living off of Miami Street and Tower Grove South, and also the Hill, with their mother Barbara Smith. As long as Susan or Adam could remember, their mother had kept a box in the freezer.
I'm 37, and it has been in my freezer for 37 years.
This box was about the size of a large shoebox, like the kind of box you'd expect boots to be in. On the rare occasions they brought it up, Barbara would tell them something like, "It's nothing, no comment, don't worry about it," before changing the subject.
I've asked her several times. It was either a no-no conversation, she blew me off.
The siblings thought maybe there was a wedding cake topper in there, but mostly they had grown used to the familiar box in the freezer that had been there as long as they had, or maybe even longer. Barbara and the kids were somewhat involved with her close-knit Catholic family, including aunts, cousins, and a grandmother. But Barbara and Terry Smith, the father, didn't stay together very long. For a few years, Adam would split his time between Terry and Barbara, but his father mostly spent his time drinking at bars, and few kids really want to watch their parents drink sticky liquid in dark, oddly smelling places. So because she was slightly better than his father, he stayed with his mother, who regularly belittled him for no good reason, and was a mean drunk. But this is all he knew. But frankly, he knew very little about her because of her secretive persona. Once, when he was 8 or younger, he noticed his mom was sad. She told him that, "My firstborn Jennifer would have been 21 today." Yet this was just another in a series of partial revelations given to Adam throughout his life. Yet one more tidbit that he thought little of at the time. When Adam was around 12 in the mid-1990s, Barbara began drinking very heavily and hanging out with other people who were into partying too. So she wasn't around a whole lot, constantly out of the house, hanging out with her boyfriends, and going to bars. It was around this time that Barbara met Stephen Yaw, a man who became a long-term romantic and domestic partner. Stephen describes Barbara as headstrong, stubborn, domineering, set in her ways, and he cites as an example the time he bought a car to get to and from work, and she screamed at him, "What are you going to use that for?" Finding all of this rather intolerable, Adam started working so he could move out on his own as soon as he could legally. But his mom kept her toxic tendrils attached to her boy. "I always got sucked back in," Adam said. "That was my mom." Even years after he left the house, she would still call him and ask him to run errands, get groceries, pick up medicine, or to do other odds and ends for her. He believes this relationship stunted his independence, preventing him from fully realizing the life he wanted for himself. And because his mother kept secrets as she did, it was hard for her family or children to really know the truth about things in her life. And thus, it would be left to Adam and Susan to figure out their own identities and familial lineages as adults. For instance, Adam and Susan share the last name Smith, so they naturally assume they shared the same father. But Terry Smith was not Susan's father. Instead, Barbara had earlier been married to a man named Howard Smith, and she had cheated on him with a man named Don last name unknown, and Don was actually Susan's biological father, making Susan and Adam only half-siblings. But as the dutiful son Adam was, he was never judgmental of his mom for her past. In 2017, Stephen Yaw leaves Barbara and moves to Houston. Adam says this is because Stephen didn't want to deal with Barbara's medical issues. But Stephen says he left after he discovered Barbara had spent $40,000 of his money. He claims he had given her access to his accounts to pay bills, but didn't realize she spent this much money on food, cigarettes, and things like car payments for her and her children. Regardless, it was mostly assumed that Adam would take care of his mother now that she was alone and in poor health. So there he was, expected to take care of his mom like he always had. So he moved into her dingy, cluttered St. Louis apartment, number 2 West, where the walls looked and smelled like 2 decades of heavy smoking. Though she swore to the doctors that she didn't smoke, it came as no surprise to Adam when about a year later, she was diagnosed with small cell carcinoma, a powerful form of lung cancer usually caused by a lifetime of smoking. A CT scan confirmed this and showed that the cancer had spread to her bones, lymphatic system, and liver. Yet despite her poor health, she continued to control and berate her son. On any of the rare times that Adam would arrange for his sister Susan to come over to take care of Barbara so he could have a night out, his mom would just scream at him, "Oh, here goes whiny butt. Here he goes whining. Fuck, just leave. Go to your girlfriend's." Sometimes he'd call his girlfriend on speakerphone, just so someone could witness the awful things she'd say to him during her rages. Not wanting to scream with the sick old woman, he mostly silently took it. And let's face it, after a lifetime of this treatment, he likely didn't have much ability to retaliate or instantiate some control in a meaningful way, even before her health condition. I imagine every time she'd rage at him, he'd just sit there lost in his thoughts, hoping she finishes soon, feeling rage at her, but yet unable to do anything, and somehow likely still found a way to see it as at least partially his fault. That's the really insidious part of emotional abuse people don't understand. You eventually repress yourself, already knowing what happens when you do anything in defiance. Hell, maybe defying her was what set her rage off this time. Though more often than not, it probably didn't matter what he did or didn't do, she's still going to react the exact same way. Years of this kind of treatment can lead even the most giving people to become burned out cynics. Compassion fatigue, they call it. Adam says of his mother, "For a woman dying, you wouldn't think someone had that much strength to sit there and like bang on an ottoman saying, 'Die, motherfucker, die.'" Yeah, she would tell me that. And think about it. That's what he's comfortable telling the media. So one can only imagine the tremendous weight on Adam's head. But like the dutiful son he is, he took care of her to the very end and beyond. In late 2019, Adam even called a priest to their apartment. He tells the priest he's not particularly religious, but asks that if he could just say a few words, I know she'd appreciate it. Within days, the inevitable happened. Barbara Smith passed on Sunday, July 21st, 2019. She was 68 years old. Adam was lost in a confusing mix of grief, life upheavals, and personal healing. About a week after Barbara passed, Adam's girlfriend was relentless in her push for him to clean out Barbara's apartment. And she had good reason. It's now Saturday, July 27th, and he has to be out on August 1st. There was clutter everywhere, dirty dishes, half-packed boxes, and 2 old cats that needed to be adopted.
That would be the biggest relief in the world right now if I could find them a home today. It's my last days.
In order to manage the space, he even began to try to sell some of her stuff at a DIY estate sale of sorts. Saturday night, he throws a bottle of water in the freezer. Right about midnight, he retrieves the chilled water from the freezer and notices the box. He also realizes for the first time in his life, his mother wasn't around to tell him not to open it, or to be upset with him that he had opened it. So he takes a picture of the open freezer door and sends it to Susan, his aunt, and his girlfriend. His aunt replies, "What if it's money?" At this point, money is basically the only thing he's confident is not in the box. At first, he considers waiting until his sister and girlfriend could join to open the box. But curiosity gets the best of him, and he takes the box from the freezer. Using a serrated kitchen knife sitting on the table, he cuts open the box. Inside the box, he sees a pink fleece blanket and a baby's foot.
It still had skin, hair and everything. It was mummified. After that, I just freaked out. I put it back into the box, and I called police right away.
This is crazy, the dispatcher said. I'm just going to transfer you to 911. Still in shock, Adam waits for the officers outside and leads them upstairs. In front of the box, an officer asks Adam if he's going to pick it up. Adam says, "I'm not touching that thing again," before going into his room to collect his thoughts. Eventually, a detective joins the officers in the kitchen, now a crime scene, and the police take Adam to a precinct where a homicide detective interviews him. After a short time, Adam is able to convince the detective that he had no idea there was a baby in the box. The detective apologizes to him for what he's gone through, and Adam is released. The infant is handed off to the medical examiner who will do an autopsy to hopefully get some more information for the family. And the next day, the media circus begins. First is Channel 5, then the Riverfront Times, and the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. Then the story goes national and even international.
Like yesterday, it went everywhere. One of my friends said it was on the news in Australia. I'm like, this is insane. I did not expect it.
So in the midst of this poor introverted man's mourning of his mother, an awful discovery of what seems to be his sister, he is thrown into the spotlight in ways he couldn't have imagined and certainly wouldn't have asked for. But this just leaves him with more questions than answers. Who really was his mother? What other secrets did she keep? And so this caused Barbara's family to compare their understandings of her life. How many husbands and children did she truly have? Everyone came up with different numbers. Even Stephen Yaw, when he heard about the story on Facebook, is completely blown away by it. He says of the box, "For 20 years I saw that box in the freezer and it was never used. Didn't move. I always wondered what the box was for. Didn't ask." For Adam, this revelation of the infant in the box changes so many things because he realizes just how many secrets his mom kept from him and her family. And also with the realization that she was okay with leaving a dead infant in the freezer, knowing that he would have to find it after her death. He says, she knew she wasn't going to be around much longer. Why couldn't she tell us?
And I cannot help it to think she might have done something to it. I just can't help it.
Though, had she told him about the baby in the freezer, he may have faced some criminal liability if he had waited until after her death to report it to the police. So in her own way, she may have saved him from punishment for her actions, regardless of whether or not her intentions were selfishly just to save face with her family in her dying days. In the weeks after finding the baby, Adam runs through his memory to understand his mother better. He's convinced that the baby in the box is his sister Jennifer that his mother had offhandedly mentioned to him that day when she was sad, the girl that would have been 21. But the box is still shrouded in mystery.
Adam Smith tells me the shock hasn't worn off.
He was like, just think about that, Adam. Your whole life, you've been eating food out of there, and there's been, I would assume, my frozen sister.
Since Susan and Adam remember the box always being in the freezer, it's likely that the box had been in the freezer since the early 1970s. Given this time frame, Barbara would have been under 20 years old and would still have been living with her strictly Catholic family at their home in Florissant, Missouri. Again, this is a revelation that opens more questions than it answers. Had she kept the box in the freezer at her parents' house? What had she done with it until she was able to put it in the first freezer she put it in? And where was that first freezer? And did anyone else know? It should be said that there is a possibility that her family members are keeping secrets, or maybe the secret partially died with some members of her family. For example, did Adam's grandparents know? But given what we're about to learn about Barbara, it's much more likely that she concealed her first pregnancy. Especially because in 1986, when Adam was 5 or so, Barbara secretly gave birth to another daughter and put her up for adoption without anyone in the family, even Susan and Adam, knowing that she was even pregnant. So it came as quite a shock to everyone when Adam's cousin Jessica got 23andMe DNA testing and discovered she had not one, but 2 female full cousins. One lived in Illinois and the other resides in Florida. And this finally gave Adam and the family the name of the older sister, Shannon. Shannon was the surviving twin that was adopted in 1977, but the younger sister was a shock no one was expecting, because Barbara had somehow managed to keep that pregnancy completely secret. I would imagine because she didn't want to have any more arguments against giving this baby up for adoption like she had had before. But this is another secret that Barbara took to her grave. Laura Sorensen, the younger sister, grew up in St. Louis and had lived in Springfield, Illinois for the last decade. After speaking with Jessica, Adam's cousin, via 23andMe, they realized that Laura was Barbara's daughter, but sadly she'd missed meeting her birth mother by mere weeks. Hoping to attend the funeral, Laura searches for Barbara's obituary and comes across the many stories about the baby in the freezer. Realizing that she had already read this story, she was immediately overwhelmed with emotion, saying, "I was like, no way. I totally read that headline earlier that week. Apparently that's my birth mom and my half-brother." Laura was able to attend Barbara's funeral and hung out with the family afterwards. Laura and Adam hit it off and bonded instantly. Because as siblings often do, they had so much in common. Laura shares a letter from the adoption agency about her birth parents with Barbara's side of the family. Her father was an acquaintance of Barbara's ex-husband, likely meaning Terry Smith. This man and Barbara had dated for 18 months or so, but had broken up before Laura's birth. The letter states that Laura was Barbara's 7th pregnancy, and that prior she had had 1 miscarriage, a stillbirth, and 4 natural births. This means the baby in the freezer was likely her first pregnancy and natural birth, and this took place in the early 1970s. This was followed by her pregnancy with Susan in 1974 for the 2nd natural birth. 3 years later, she had Shannon and the stillborn twin for another natural birth and the stillbirth. Adam is born in 1981, the 4th natural birth. And since Laura then would be the 5th of 5 natural births, this means that there was a miscarriage and another birth unattended for because, like I said, the stillborn was the other twin. But the letter also says Barbara's son had severe hearing problems, even though Adam's hearing is and always has been fine, which means that the adoption worker somehow either made careless mistakes, was working off of incomplete information, completely made stuff up, or Barbara lied to them. But like many things in Barbara's life, this is just one more secret she probably kept to herself. Thinking about the baby in the freezer, Laura says of the birth mother she never met, maybe something tragic happened, and she didn't know what to do, and that was her solution to not getting in trouble. She was young when it happened. I don't think it was criminal. It takes a big heart to give up 2 children to adoption, so I have a hard time believing there would be any kind of malice involved. In August, Adam works to save the funds to have his and his sister Susan's DNA tested by 23andMe. But a month later in September, he wins $1,000 on a scratch ticket and is now easily able to afford the tests. The results show that Adam, Susan, and Laura are half-siblings, but Laura's dad's identity is still unknown. This experience has been rough on Adam, especially being thrown into the media spotlight and given the mix of emotions he has towards his mother. She left him an inheritance of secrets, missing answers she took to the grave. And yet, her death has also brought him relief. He no longer has to watch his mom suffering and pain, and he's also free of her cruelty and parentification. "I was held back for so many years by my mom's sickness," he says. "I could never go and venture out and do my own thing. Now I get to do what I want, what I've always wanted to do." The burden of parentification and abuse weighs heavy on anyone for years and sometimes decades after the experiences. And yet, the peace found from knowing that you've escaped this is bittersweet. And I'm glad to see that Adam seems to be embracing the lightness of his being now that he's relieved from her immense weight. I truly hope that Adam is able to realize his dreams, and I highly recommend EMDR to anyone dealing with trauma, especially complex trauma like decades of abuse. It's been incredibly helpful for me. But after hearing this story, what do you think? Please leave a comment if you're so inclined. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if so, I invite you to subscribe and turn on the bell so you get notified when I release a new video. Generally Tuesdays around 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. But subscribes and likes also signal to YouTube that these videos are worth sharing with more people, and because of that, I'm grateful to anyone who comments, subscribes, or even just clicks the like button. Though I don't always reply, I do read every single comment, even the mean ones. And all that's appreciated, but never expected. Thank you. Also, if you enjoyed this video, I bet you'll like this one about an old man who shot a pregnant woman running away after robbing him, or this one about an immigrant from the Dominican Republic who killed a man in self-defense but was prosecuted anyway. And I hope to see you again really soon, because there's always something disturbing lurking underneath the floorboards somewhere.